Hi everyone. Today I wanted to do a follow-up to my video Fascism in Street Fighter 6 Marissa question mark. And I got some feedback in the comment section of that video, and actually a larger response than I'm used to on my channel. I've only just started making content again, and this is the largest response that I've gotten from any video. So I want to say thank you to people tuning in and providing feedback. Most of it was iffy, but there were actually a couple of things that people mentioned that I wanted to explore in further detail. And I will say that my initial response to Marissa was just that, a first impression. And I wanted to take a chance to explore some of these ideas about what makes fascism fascism in relation to the character by exploring what we know about them officially a little bit more in depth, and then applying that to various concepts that I didn't have a chance to talk about as much as I wanted to. So, without further ado, I have basically a window open here, and I have different points that I'm just going to cycle through in order and examining the character at the same time. So we're going to go over the character here, look at what the literal Street Fighter 6 website says about her, and then take what we learn about that and apply it to different concepts that are tied to fascism more generally. I also want to look at some of the comments that I got as a means of exploring the meta relationship between fascism in the text and fascism as an ongoing relationship between consumers and the text. It's not just what does the text say within itself, but what does the relationship between consumers and the text relating back and forth potentially say about Marissa as a fascist character? So not just Marissa as a fascist character, but also fascist consumers. That's right. It's not just you are what you eat, but what you eat is you are what you eat. I tried to say something pithy there, but basically you have the thing that you're eating defines what you are, but also you're helping define the thing that you're eating. And it's just as important to examine those that are basically sort of colonizing the text and saying like, oh, this is what it is. So all I really had to do was say, oh, well, Marissa is fascist, and then all of the people coming in and basically trying to, well, refute me, I guess, except they were sort of making my point about Marissa. In an attempt to defend the character, they sort of made my argument for me. So I'll look at some of the comments at the end of the video. So without further ado, let's look at Marissa here. So Marissa, Street Fighter 6 website. This is the fighter roster. I had someone mention to me that Allegra Clark is a non-binary person, I believe. I'm going to check that real quick. Okay, so I found some information about Allegra from Allegra herself. They have voiced non-binary characters in the past, and they actually go out of their way to recognize the validity of non-binary people. So that's totally cool. But they themselves, their pronouns are she, her, cis, queer, voice actor, and that's totally a legitimate thing. Queerness isn't exclusively defined by gender. It can be defined by one's gender performance, one's gender orientation. All of these things sort of coalesce together to inform one's queerness. So that's cool. At the same time, though, it doesn't change the fact that my argument is not about Allegra Clark, the person playing the character, but my argument is about Marissa herself having fascist potential. And that fascist potential is informing the views of the audience. And that is something that will immediately become clear when you start looking at the comments section and all of the delightful things that are being said in defense, supposedly, of the character's non-fascistness. So even if Allegra Clark were a very, very marginalized person, they represented all of these like historical targets of fascism, it doesn't change the fact that Tolkienism, for one, is something that can happen. And in this particular instance, I'm not saying that Tolkienism is something that's happening in an aggressive kind of way, but either there is a deliberate choice to use a voice actress who is seemingly, she's not a neo-Nazi or something like that. Congratulations. That is literally the bare minimum. But even if she were a hyper-marginalized group, or she was just middle of the road, like a cis queer white woman, something like that, it doesn't change the fact that Marissa herself is written a very particular way. Marissa herself, the details that define the character and what makes up her will not change regardless of who's playing her. And you can have the person who's playing her say, well, I don't condone fascism. That's great. But that's explicitly a statement made by Allegra Clark. And it's not something, unless it shines through the performance, isn't something that's communicated textually. And it's not something that people are going to pick up on. It's almost beside the point. Because if Marissa comes off as fascist through the details that we learn about her, then it doesn't really matter who's playing her. You could have Gandhi playing her, and it wouldn't make a difference. Okay, that out of the way, now that we've looked at the voice actress, a cis queer person who is playing Marissa and who does support and recognize the validity of non-binary people, very cool. We have the character Marissa herself. So, Marissa herself is, and I quote, an up-and-coming jewelry designer from Italy who claims ancestry to ancient Greek warriors. As a child, she was inspired by a vision of the Colossus in its prime. Today, she seeks glory with a smile and an eye for beauty. That sentence sounds kind of awkward. Let's see. Hate. She hates heights. I suppose that's supposed to be ironic, like, oh, you're this big, strong person, but you're a fraidy cat. She's 6'8", 269 pounds. Nice. Likes worthy opponents, asabuco, and fine arts. All right, so right off the bat, there is a tremendous amount of, well, fascist markers present just within that tiny little paragraph. She's a jewelry designer, right? There's nothing inherently fascist about that. So I'll come back to that point in a second. But moreover, she's from Italy, and she claims ancestry to ancient Greek warriors. Now, within sort of Nordic thought or pro-European, Western chauvinistic, whatever crypto-fascist label you want to sort of supply, a carryover from the fascism of World War II, is this claim to various forms of overblown ancestry, like the idea of this glorified past that you have a connection to through a hereditary bloodline. And this goes back to more feudalistic approaches to governance, what Bakhtin would refer to as hereditary rights and dynastic power exchange, which is something that Hitler himself, through the creation of the Third Reich, a kingdom that would last 1,000 years, with nepotistic tendencies of a imperial bloodline, a return to greatness that is nevertheless sort of unique to the present, because the way that they're going about it is they're recreating it in the minds of people through fascist propaganda in the present. And a large part of that is a claim to a glorious ancestry as tied to infamous warriors of the past. This could be like Teutonic Knights, this could be Roman soldiers, Julius Caesar. Benito Mussolini envisioned a return or a rise of the Roman Empire in the 20th century, and the creation of the Third Reich, the rise of a new order that mirrors this fictionalized variant of a reimagined past. So that's what's happening with Marissa here. She is claiming ancestry to this past greatness. As a child, she was inspired by a vision of the Colosseum in its prime. So you have this old ruin that she in her mind is envisioning being restored to its former greatness. And in pursuit of that glory, she has effectively embodied it through her impressive stature and body. She has the body of a traditional sort of colossus-sized male warrior. Now, that's not to say that you can't have Amazons that are present as, well, masc or femme. That's a totally legitimate concept, but we have to bear in mind that her personification of masculine strength, her masculine body, is one that is juxtaposed with this image of a reimagined past, this creation or recreation of a former Italy restored to its former glory. And this is what I'll refer to as fascist pastiche. Basically, a intertextual recursive pastiche, where you have a conversation amongst fascist legends, where you have one creating another, creating another, creating another, that's tied entirely to the world of fascist make-believe, where you had the warriors of various points in history that are all kind of homogenized or housed within the same sort of warrior's homestead, a Valhalla, if you will. And there's not really anything historical about that had they actually confronted each other in real life. If the Romans had encountered the Vikings, or the Vikings had encountered the Knights Templar, they would have fought each other. They would not have been friends. But this attempt to claim ancestry to ancient Greek warriors, but also the presentation of this ancient pastness tied to Italy, the Mediterranean sort of Superman, is something that Mussolini sort of coined or made famous at the very least. And then you have a combination of that with the Colosseum, which is a Roman construct. And then also you have past recreations that are far more recent than that, like Zack Snyder's 300, the combination of the lion, the all-powerful Herculean task. I forget the name of the exact lion. It doesn't matter. Just this large, powerful animal that has to be bested in combat, while also being gilded, given a crown, right? It's a mighty lion that is crowned, and it's also the symbol of the Imperium, gold, red. These aren't just arbitrary colors. They're chosen quite specifically. The petals of the Roman Colosseum, the cloaks of these Spartan-esque Zack Snyder style 300 Spartans, their bodies are mostly bare, and to show off their rippling physiques. So the idea of them being sort of fascist in a way that's being marketed and sold in an ahistorical way to an American audience is thrown into the blender. And then so there are various homogenized supermen from a historical past that is being clumped together in this current iteration of Capcom's Italian fascism, that kind of thing. And amongst all of that, you have this tableau, and then you have the person performing in front of the tableau, Marissa, and she's sort of basking in the glory of a reinvented past. And not only do you have the Colosseum, but if you look in the background here, you also have the Pantheon. So really just this homogenizing of a, not just like a pro-Western ideal, but an idealized Western ideal where you're sort of cherry picking all of these different things and throwing them together. And this leads to the creation of a national ideal. The Nazis had the Third Reich. Benito Mussolini, he had his own return of the Roman Empire. This is called Palingenetic Ultranationalism. So it's a generic fascist technique where palingenesis means national rebirth. You are recreating a nation in a new image of itself, borrowing images of the past that are used in obfuscating ways that are just sort of meant to communicate ideas of the past through icons of strength. So they're ahistorical, but they're used to revive this idea of greatness within a nation. So it's a nation creation myth where you're synthesizing all of these different components of strength that are tied to glory, that they're tied to beauty. The restoration of a neoclassical mode of art through the expression of strength of the human body as a site of this national rebirth. She is a national hero, a hero of this newly created nation of all these different homogenized past markers that are tied to imperium, that are tied to strength. Not only that, she is a jewelry maker whose jewelry seems to be weaponized. This is either an arrowhead or a shield, but it's a masculine, warlike kind of symbol. It almost kind of mirrors what's on this shield. So this particular symbol, I don't know what it signifies necessarily, but everything has a weapon-like sort of look to it. These look almost like the gladius sort of blades, right? Where they are almost like sword-like or phallic. And even these helmets almost look like projectiles that you might stab someone with. Even her hair. Everything is very traditionally masculinized in a warlike way. Everything is bathed in red. The petals of the Colosseum sort of coat the ground in the blood. It's a form of censoring, right? Where the glory and the perfume-like sort of splendor of the Colosseum is mirroring the blood spill that falls in combat in ways that take the immediate carnage out of it, because I imagine this is a T for teen game. It's not going to be too gory, but you're still communicating the ideas of glory through combat within the Colosseum. And you're probably wondering, why am I mentioning this apart from its connection to the historical past? Like, what does this have to do with anything apart from the fact that, well, Hitler did it once, Mussolini did it once, but she could be doing it differently, right? Capcom could be doing it differently, and I will grant you this. There is a difference in that a giant neoliberal corporation, that is a corporation that is interested in profit above all else, is, amongst other things, selling the idea of fascism as something to market to a global audience by neutralizing it, presenting it as something that is whitewashed, that is sanitized. There's nothing problematic about this. Nation states just exist. They come up all the time, and they're just things that you have to accept as a way of life. The Colosseum as a way of life. What is Street Fighter if not a place where people can duke it out in combat? Particularly a sanitized form of combat where no one has to get hurt. And I will say that there isn't anything intrinsically wrong with that. At the same time, I want to highlight that palingenesis is something that is used to communicate an idea of greatness or superiority that is connected to nation states' inherently conservative values that lead to problems through nation states. So fascism is a response to capitalism in crisis. Capitalism is a response. It is something that is run through nation states, imperialism being the highest form of capitalism, and to this day, the imperialism of the United States and its various allies through the West, through NATO, isn't something that's stopped. Imperialism and all of the consequences of capitalism are continuing to happen, and one way to conceal that is through various disguises, dressing things up as you show people combat exclusively through popular media, and they stop examining things that are happening in the real world. This is sort of a replacement for the real world. It becomes more real than the real world because people aren't looking at the real world, they're looking at this instead. Furthermore, these ideas of greatness lead to a sense of superiority amongst teams. The strongest is the best, but in relation to fascism, the strongest is the best against an enemy that is deemed degenerate, that is deemed lesser, tied to in-groups and out-groups within imperialism, within settler colonialism. And there's a particular post that came up today by Bad Empanada that I wanted to read out because it highlights it through the communication of these ideas within the realm of sports. Just as Marissa here is conveying her greatness tied to a particular national entity that is fascist, i.e. palingenetic, and combining all of these different disparate elements of ahistory and ahistorical markers tied to historical markers to create a sort of perfected idea of what a nation can rise to through the realms of combat. Like, that's what Marissa represents. That particular notion of she is the greatest, she is the strongest, and it's all dressed up in a very sort of hauntologically fascist kind of way. But you can see similar ideas of superiority that aren't outwardly fascist in quite the same way, that aren't relying on ultranationalism, the cult of action for action's sake, the enemy is both weak and strong, various other things that I could sort of rattle off that are tied to a rejection of modernity, the cult of strength, the interior sort of spy or imposter that has to be rooted out through these displays of strength. Like, all of these various things can be conveyed through this return to form, this return to tradition. All of that is embodied within this entire sort of pastiche, the tableau and the performer, in this case Marissa. But within the larger world of sports, you can see that in the World Cup. Within the World Cup, you can see fascism and neoliberalism play out in how people treat each other as belonging to particular in-groups and out-groups on the world stage through a competitive mode, the competitive mode of sports, franchised sports that are owned by corporations that represent nations, but also national attitudes. Nations did not exist in the eyes of some people until sports came along and reified them in ways that sort of create, for some people, reality itself. Their entire world revolves around attitudes of nationalism and strength and what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, tied to sports, who wins, who loses. In boxing, there's an expression, boxing is war personified, and this was something that played out in World War II, where you had the Brown Bomber, Joe Louis, and going up against various athletes from around the world. Specifically, he lost to Max Schmeling, a German, and that idea of Joe Louis sort of being Captain America and having to knock out Nazi Germany, even though, from what I understand, Max Schmeling wasn't a member of the Nazi Party. he represented the nation by almost sort of a de facto appointment. It's like, well, you're the champ, so you're representing us even if you don't want to. And it wasn't really, shall we say, in Schmeling's best interest to defy the Führer's wishes. Yeah, okay, it's one of those instances where you might want to just keep your head down and focus on the match. The point being is that Joe Louis, a person of color, and Max Schmeling, who was a German citizen who wasn't actually a member of the Nazi Party, are nevertheless being foisted into these geopolitics that are conveyed through the world of sports. All right, so that happened historically during World War II, but it also happens in other sports too, not just boxing, but the Olympics more generally, and also the World Cup. So Bad Empanada is, someone, he's a post-colonialist. He describes things very much from a non-Western point of view, and is able to sort of describe how things play out through sports. He writes, "I laugh every time I see some faux outrage like this, where someone claims it's racist to deny one's Frenchness. The reality is that those who complain like this feel very anxious when they're reminded of the Africanness of so many prominent French players, as there is nothing that makes it more obvious that your country would be nothing without colonialism than by its reliance on continuing to rob the colonies of human capital in the supposed post-colonial era. There's just so many presumptions that go into even claiming this in the first place, that not being fully French is a bad thing, that being African is lesser, that being accepted by the metropole as French makes one somehow more valuable." And this ties into the problematic nature of nation states that are conveyed through these types of dialogues. Dialogically through sports, you have the centrist notion, winner takes all, through the conveying of value tied through strength, winning. But the problem is that the fascist components of various nations, the settler colonial sort of aspect, where you have this creation of this idealized form of a nation, even in more seemingly liberalized forms like the United States, where, truth, justice, equality, all of these sort of platitudic concepts, like they seem wholly fine, but they're used basically as platitudes because they don't apply to everyone. They uphold the status quo as an image that is applied unevenly. They're generally enjoyed by white men, first and foremost. If you're a Native American, forget about it. And then there's various other people as well, people of color, various immigrants, white, black, and brown, that just don't enjoy the same privileges as the white sort of majority, the silent majority. And within the settler colonial binary, black versus white, these types of things tend to play out in fascist ways, even if the nation itself is posturing as being better than, say, Nazi Germany. America is the enemy of Nazi Germany, so there's no way that America can be fascist if Joe Louis knocks out Max Schmeling. But the thing is, it doesn't change the fact that even if he did, he's still going to be mistreated as a proponent of imperialism that upholds the status quo. And the same problems lead into situations where if Argentina beats a Western nation, for instance, then people will say, well, it's because they won, but they are lesser because the better man lost today, and they're not European. And this kind of concept ties into Marissa, for instance, where everything is adorned in gold and glory and power, and her position as righteous is very much gilded, and it's very much portrayed as valuable through currency, through the love of glory and gold, sort of a Tolkien-esque dragon sickness, the love of things that sparkle. But the moral of the story, not all that glitters is gold. And furthermore, the love of gold tied to displays of power is draconian, is monstrous. That was the Tolkien-esque sort of moral in The Hobbit in particular, was that the portrayal of gold, the pursuit of glory and gold, is self-destructive, is Promethean. And with someone like Marissa, where they are posturing themselves as glorious, as more valuable, you see that in dialogues about various nations where they might lose, but they're more valuable because they belong to a particular national identity that has higher material conditions, that's more developed. So it's basically saying, well, we lost, but we still are a first world country, whereas you're not. We're better. And if there are people within our team that are from other places, the reason that they're performing as well as they do is because they must have some aspect of us within it. Bad Empanada goes on to say, the clear implication is that they believe that French culture, and by extension European culture, is superior. It is no longer acceptable to claim to be biologically superior, so Europeans, and the French especially, now lean heavily into this idea that they are better than everyone else for cultural reasons, and that this is not racist, they imply, because anyone can become a superior Frenchman, European, etc., as long as they assimilate and make sure never to remind us that they are African. It is, in fact, through some magic, actually racist to acknowledge that these people are only French due to an incredibly coercive colonial relation. And that's just it. It's a relationship between this perception of a fabricated national identity, one spread through propaganda, but also through the violence of sports as quite literally colonized by national bodies. What is Street Fighter if nation states personifying war through national heroes? And this particular national hero, Marissa, is celebrating the richness of her culture, is reimagined as red-blooded, but also adorned in gold and glory and battle in ways that are historically no different than Hitler or Mussolini. And it's been repackaged in this way that's sort of neutralized by Capcom in a very neoliberal way, where you're not invited to think about it as anything other than just yet another fascist that is perpetrated within the product in and of itself. It's no different than Darth Vader, where they resemble fascism in a way that can be commodified and presented within a centrist narrative of good versus evil. But would people feel the same way about this if Marissa were German? Because, and that's something I guess I want to get into in a moment, is there's a certain sort of expectation where Nazis are kind of envisioned as being from a very, very particular place, to have this hyper-specific definition that if you don't meet that, it can be dismissed. Oh, well, she's not a Nazi because all Italians aren't Nazis, I guess, aren't members of the Axis powers. She's just Italian, and she happens to like all of these things that fascists would like, and sort of pimps herself out in this hauntological sort of regalia. And it's like, all right, but at the end of the day, Zack Snyder isn't from Nazi Germany, and yet 300 exemplifies the same kind of Palingenetic Ultranationalism, and as Marissa does, he's not Italian or German, he's American, and yet he's still packaging and selling the same kind of thing. And they're literally mirroring that. Capcom is literally mirroring that here and expecting people to recognize that and the various other markers of this ahistorical past that are meant to value fascist ideas of strength, but to see it as neutral, to not think about it critically, because that's the whole point about neoliberal propaganda, is it neutralizes everything. It takes the politics about everything, and you see things just as within the text, as this is Italy, but it's just Italy where you have this cartoonish version of evil, but it's not going to progress any further than this. This is as fascist as it will get. That's sort of the silent promise of the text. It's the implication of Capcom is that this isn't real fascism. There's no way that it can inspire people to think in a fascist kind of way. And I wanted, before I move on to the comments of my video to kind of sort of prove that wrong, I also just want to examine the dangers of this type of thing, where in the case of Capcom, there's sort of a slippery slope, where in this type of character, I feel like is a step removed from the fascism that people are trained to recognize in popular media. Like if they made this character German and male, then there wouldn't be enough of a disguise there, and people would be like, okay, they're a German and they're surrounded by this neo-classical sort of Third Reich kind of glorified past, and they're in red and black and they're demonstrating it as sort of like glorious. Like at that point would it sort of sink in that, hey, this feels kind of fascist, but because, oh well, she's a big strong woman and she's Italian, that, oh well, I guess it can't be connected then, totally unrelated. And that's the problem with that kind of neutral consumption, is it is a place for bad faith consumers who are pro-European, who are Western chauvinists, who are proud of their white supremacist heritage, to say, that isn't what's going on here. I have plausible, deniability. But at the end of the day, this is Palingenetic Ultranationalism, and it doesn't really take too much. Capcom doesn't have to explicitly, pull a Birth of a Nation, for instance, which is a silent film directed by D.W. Griffith that is basically the Star Wars of its day, that is portrayed to a return to greatness, wherein these hauntological sort of knights, the Jedi of this film, are Klansmen, and they're fighting against a nationalized sort of foe, a national scapegoat, no different from the backstabbing Jew, or in the case of world sports, no different than African people, where on the world stage, what is war personified in a fascist way? It's the West versus everyone else, the West versus degenerates, and the West versus the weak, but someone that you have to fight because the enemy is both weak and strong. And this type of thing, you might think, oh, well, it's obvious because everyone looks at the KKK and thinks, well, they're bad. Well, no, point of fact, when this film debuted, it was screened. It was the first motion picture to be screened inside the White House, viewed there by President Woodrow Wilson, his family, and members of his cabinet. And that type of approach to basically what would go on to become American Hollywood was something that was aped by Adolf Hitler, who in his own settler colonial endeavors tried to imitate the United States and then sort of infuse within it his own radical politics. But there was already a radical element disguised within something like The Birth of a Nation. And this particular thing is, a lot of the elements are already in place, and you just have to have people who take these and respond to them in a fascist way. And that brings us to my video and various comments. So this video is has a larger response than anything on my channel, which is nothing, compared to much larger channels. I only have 672 subscribers, and the number of views is 1.2k views. Okay, that's nothing. But at the same time, just in response to everything else that I've done, this is just the largest response that I've ever got. But that's not even really the point. The point here is what people are saying. And everyone is basically pulling a DARVO kind of tactic where, oh, we're not fascist, or Marissa, the character we identify with, isn't fascist. You're the idiot. You're the lunatic. You're the liar, or you're the Waard. You're the tyrant. That kind of thing. We're not the bad guy. You are. And real quick, DARVO is deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. And this is very common, a very common bad faith tactic within cycles of abuse, where you have people in reactive abusive situations, someone like Kyle Rittenhouse who says, I'm not attacking you right now. I'm defending myself. I'm engaging defense against you, despite Kyle being armed with, an automatic rifle and being fully armored and going to a counter protest to very obviously shoot people and just poking and prodding them and waiting until someone reacts and then responding with extreme prejudice. You could make similar arguments about the TERFs in Great Britain. You could make similar arguments historically with the Jews who were put into the Warsaw Ghetto and various other camps where they're surrounded, they're penned in and abused, and then eventually they're poked and prodded and bullied until someone decides to fight back. And you can't win in a situation like that because you're surrounded by people who have all of the formal official power. You are the rebels in Star Wars. You are the Palestinians in Israel. And there's really no way to win without appealing to people outside of your prison. But the problem is that this type of conversation on the world stage is one that is had by the bourgeoisie. All right, nation states are owned by powerful corporations, powerful heads of state, politicians that enforce a bourgeoisie sort of politic, a dialogue that requires the existence of fascism as something to cover up for capitalism in crisis, is leading to various things that are going to lower the quality of life for people around the globe. So to sort of distract people from the fact that capitalism is destructive, that it leads to genocide, famine, various other types of Malthusian sort of outcomes, mass death basically, and that everything is hoarded by billionaires, by giant corporations, is basically a giant distraction, which is fascism, the greater evil. And then America must be good. And then trying to appeal to that, what's happening with the Palestinians, where they're like, help, help, we're being repressed very, very obviously by an ethno-state, a Jewish ethno-state, and they're appealing to the powers that be who are funding that ethno-state. And it is the status quo, but it's dressed up in such a way to sort of disguise it. And anyone who tries to comment on that, Bad Empanada, for instance, commenting about Israel, was attacked by various members of Ian Kaczynski, aka Vosh, and a Zionist individual that he propped up and said, okay, you should go after Bad Empanada and say that he is an anti-Semite. And this particular individual, I don't even remember their name off the top of my head, they said, sure, yeah, he's an anti-Semite. So you see that sort of deny, attack, reverse victim and offender kind of thing going on with a lot of different kind of politics, but that includes Marissa from Street Fighter, where I'm like, okay, she seems kind of fascist in the same way that Zack Snyder feels kind of fascist. And the fascist components of a centrist exchange that's furthered by a giant corporation like Capcom that's personifying war through national identities, where to the victors go the spoils, and there's no such thing as fascism outside of the game, and it's disguised just enough so that it doesn't scream Nazi, but at the same time the people who see it recognize it, and it very much feels like a dog whistle. And when I called this out, people started responding through DARVO tactics. This is what being terminally online looks like. Complete delusion and mental gymnastics so impressive it'd make Olympic judges blush. This cannot be real. There's just no way. Are the fascists in the room with us right now? As though to imply that fascists are these figments of our imagination, that they're as real as space aliens. But the point in fact is that fascism is something that survives through obscurantism, through bad faith, through being normalized by those in power, having conversations with them, defeating them in the free marketplace of ideas, in the case of Street Fighter, defeating them on the stage. So even if you had a Nazi-like character or an Axis-like character like Marissa, you can just play Manon and defeat her, and then the Frenchies win, and it's all good and great. But that doesn't really take away from the fact that fascism is undeniably real and survives through the text is something for consumers like these people responding to, relating to, and responding to me when I call out that this feels kind of fascist. And that's sort of the point, is that even in the title of my video, I say Marissa from Street Fighter 6 really looks like a fascist. You know, even if she isn't, she has all of the markers that allow people who identify as pro-European, as, you know, white supremacists, as Western chauvinists. It's, again, it's a disguise for crypto-fascists to use in bad faith. And the centrist dialogue of just action against action doesn't address any of that in a meaningful way. The way that you deal with fascists is you denude them, you expose them. And we really shouldn't tolerate this kind of thing in the game. And I feel like people acting like this and being like, oh, well, you're an idiot, or you're delusional, fascism isn't real, or saying, calling all Italians fascist is really insensitive, and misgendering me, calling me a man, calling me a dude, calling me a guy. I had a couple of people call me by my dead name. A grown man shouldn't be making 40-minute rants about fighting game character designs being political, that whole Gamergate 2014 sort of approach to things. This dude is going to bomb a school or something one day. You know, the conflating of left-leaning radical politics with terrorism is very much a conservative tactic. Conflating it with incurable mental illness, you know, so I'm degenerate, I'm dangerous, I'm an enemy of the de facto enemy of the state, this, you know, the hauntological sort of fascist state. And see how they're sort of reversing the victim and aggressor role, and they're putting everything onto me and making me the villain who they can then respond to with extreme prejudice. And you know, some people are a little bit more like, they're like, this is a joke, you're trolling, it's, again, lunatic, liar, lord, that kind of thing. Some people are like, oh, this is what 4chan does to your brain, i.e. you're a Nazi, I'm not a Nazi, that kind of thing, when I'm fairly certain this person probably is on 4chan, because 4chan is a place where white supremacists go, where bigots go. I'm not a bigot like Nazis are, okay? Everyone's racist to a little bit, but I can recognize where I stand within that spectrum and try and combat it, not contribute to it. And dude, brain rat, touch grass, fascism confirmed base. Okay, let's say yes, Marissa is a fascist. What do we do then? You give leftists a bad name. So again, it's all just basically, we're not Nazis, you're a Nazi. And it's all bad faith, and people show up and basically sort of trot out these things as a means of bullying, right? This is reactive abuse, a collective reactive response to being called for what I didn't even call these people fascists, okay? But I called the thing that personifies what they believe in to be fascist, and they're defending that in a very fascist way by being bigots, by attacking me in a very fascist kind of way. I'm small, I'm crazy, I'm weak, I'm an imposter, I'm a degenerate who's leading to terrorism, I'm a threat to the nation state. And so they're proving my point here in terms of, like, I didn't say anything about them. I didn't have to. I just had to say, hey, this character looks and feels fascist. And then all of these people, relatively speaking, come out of the woodwork and attack me. And not only that, all of them are anonymous. This channel doesn't have any content. You basically have here, I'll open a couple. And there's a few channels that have a little bit, but all these ones with just the letters. No content, just playlists. 26 subscribers, 2 videos. This channel doesn't have any content. This channel doesn't have any content. Okay, this is one of the channels with a little bit of content, but like again, so a lot of these people feel anonymous, and it's like, okay, this person likes Street Fighter, all right, but by and large, a lot of these channels don't have content, and I'm getting some really, really strong Gamergate vibes. One subscriber with a playlist. So yeah, again, these people are coming out, they're wearing masks, and they're doing a DARVO sort of fascist reactionary response to me, reactive abuse, trying to bully me and trying to shut me up, basically. And it's like, no, fuck you guys. Thank you for the 1 or 2 people that pointed out some interesting things, like the whole jewelry thing. I didn't really think about that until I realized that it's literally the plunder of war. I mean, what is the point of gold? The gold exemplifies glory. The gold exemplifies wealth, and traditionally through a lot of narratives, the kind that Tolkien would have written about and sort of commented on in The Hobbit, the pursuit of wealth through conquest, through theft, is a long enduring trope, and something that only until recently has been sort of replaced by capitalism, late stage capitalism. The theft of corporations is much more structural, whereas fascism is a response to capitalism in decay. You basically have the forming of these war parties that branch off and try and take glory and wealth for themselves. And I think that Marissa is very much that glorious kind of warrior who, through the feats of her incredible strength, personified, she is laden in gold. To the victor go the spoils. And there's nothing explicitly fascist about that, but combined with all of these other markers, it seems to jive with this idea of imperialism as the highest form of capitalism with a fascist flavor, that it's by itself, the jewelry doesn't mean anything, the gold doesn't mean anything, but combined with the Palingenetic Ultranationalism, strength for its own sake, the just the geopolitical sort of neutral prestige of Capcom, it starts to play not just a note, but a chord, and a very fascist kind of chord at that. And that's only enforced further or confirmed by these people who are taking it personally that I'm going after someone that they seem to care about. And a lot of them will be like, okay, well, I just like her because she's just a woman, or she's just Italian. Like, there's no subtext to these people. If you went by what they said, it's just like they just like this one thing about it, and they're not connecting anything. There's nothing holistic about their analysis. They're just trying to examine it myopically to such a degree that you're only looking at these things individually instead of looking at them as a pattern. But what they fail to realize is that by responding to me the way that they do, like, they're proving the existence of fascism through reactive DARVO abuse. And it's like, yeah, a huge part about fascism is defending the cult of the Superman, being strong, not backing down against an enemy. What am I? I'm an anarcho-communist. I'm a trans woman. But I represent a threat to their idea of what a nation should be, what the world should be. The same ideas that Matt Walsh pitches, a theocratic fascist from the United States. Like, It's the same sort of return to greatness, a return to hierarchical arrangements of power that don't allow people like me to exist. And by bullying me in response to me calling out fascism in something like Street Fighter, like, that only proves my point more, because according to them, this is totally unconnected to anything else. So why would they care if I said it was fascist? But then they come out and attack me for doing so, highlighting the connection. Not a good look, guys. Not a good look. And in any event, I think that about sums it up, just in terms of, Marissa as a character, Palingenetic Ultranationalism tied to war personified in ways that tend to prioritize the West and lead to various forms of fascism taking root in the public consciousness, but also in the annals of power. In this case, corporate annals of power, because what is Capcom if its own entity that has as much money as some nations and is creating content that people can rally towards by attacking critics of that content? To stand against the hero is to stand against the nation. To stand against the nation as this organism, it will defend itself against harmful outsiders. Oh no, kill the transes, kill the leftists, kill the terrorists. I'm just a backstabbing Jew in the eyes of these people. It's the same kind of bigotry, just pointed at a particular group. This is an act of revenge that's disguised as defense. I'm totally defending myself right now against you. You're the enemy. You're deserving of violence. So yeah, I think this was a success, and it's only encouraged me to make more content, you guys. So please, let me know what you think of this one too, and I'm going to try and find examples of this elsewhere, because trust me, it's not hard. It's everywhere. This is just one of the more recently egregious examples of it, where when I saw Marissa, I was like, oh my god, they made a muscle mom fascist. That's what they're going with. And it feels relatively egregious, but trust me, there are plenty of other examples. So if you like this kind of content, like, share, and subscribe. Feedback is always appreciated. And even amidst all of this spew from a bunch of mask-wearing fascists who are hiding behind a veil of anonymity and acting all cool by bullying someone like me, there were still a couple of interesting points. So, this kind of thing, yeah, does it bug me a little bit? Yeah, sure, whatever. But at the end of the day, I'm not a fascist, so I can walk away with my dignity, whereas these douchebags are pieces of shit, and they really don't have any kind of dignity to hold on to, except what they try and make for themselves is this sort of like monster Frankensteinian approach to history and the way that they relate to other people. Like, I'm fine, I'm doing good, and this is just going to encourage me to make more stuff. And this is what I've been doing for a while. If you go to my blog, for instance, which still has my dead name, but what are you going to do? I write about these types of things in terms of horror, metal, video games, and sex, and but also neoliberal and fascist propaganda. I've written about that in Metroidvania. I wrote my master's thesis on that, and I've been doing this kind of thing for years. But I've only just decided to start doing it on YouTube again, because this particular vlogging format is something that's easier for me to do. And I'm not at all discouraged by this type of response. If anything, keep it up. And I'm just going to keep it. You're just proving my point. The more you guys act like this, the more I'm going to shame you for it. The more I'm going to call you out on your bullshit. So please, keep at it, and I'll keep fighting the good fight, because between the two of us, like, I'm the person who thinks that basic human rights are important. I'm the person who thinks that genocide is bad. I'm the kind of person who thinks that we should fight nation states because they monopolize violence. They commodify violence in ways that lead to a division between the bourgeoisie and the worker class, efficient profit, aka killing people for money, and also infinite growth through frontier capitalism. You know, these are things that I'm against. And the fact that you aren't too just means that you're complicit in the continuation of capitalism, neoliberalism, fascism, genocide, and all of the other things that sort of extend from these ideas as materializing in the actual world. And I'm good with that, you know. It's as something to critique. I am totally okay with critiquing these things, whereas you seem to want to defend it. So, all right, whatever. Like, at the end of the day, I'm not going to change your minds, but I might change some other people's minds. And it might start to move in a different direction. At the very least, it needs to be fought. And that's what I'll do. I'll keep fighting. So until next time, guys, good night and good luck. Take care.